The Salnar had never encountered a species like humanity. They were a race that measured their power in cold calculations with technology so advanced it made them the undisputed rulers of the stars. Their ships were like shadows that swept across the cosmos with no mercy and no trace left behind. When they conquered a planet, they erased it from existence. With surgical precision, the concept of overkill was alien to them. They saw it as a waste of energy, an unnecessary expenditure that could be better used in more efficient ways. Humans, on the other hand, were something else entirely. No one had quite figured them out yet, not the Ankari, not the Orcanids, and certainly not the Xalnar. Rilke was one of the brightest diplomats of the Xalnar, a species that thrived on logic and order. Her mind was a razor's edge of calculation, and she had been tasked with one of the most important missions in her career. She was to travel to Earth and assess humanity's readiness to join the Galactic Council. It was supposed to be a straightforward mission: negotiate with the humans, see if they were up to the galactic standards. If they weren't, then they'd be quietly dismissed as a potential threat or ally. Either way, it wouldn't be a problem. But when she arrived, her expectations were shattered. The first sign that something was different about humanity came within moments of her landing. The humans didn't greet her as she expected. No formalities, no grand gestures. Instead, a military officer with short-cropped hair and a crisp uniform stepped forward and said the words that would haunt Rilke for the rest of her stay. "We've been expecting you." His tone was calm, almost casual, as if he already knew what was about to happen. "Follow me," he continued, and Rilke found herself being led through a series of corridors until they reached a room filled with screens, each showing a different part of the world's defense systems: satellites orbiting the planet, drones buzzing through the air, and human ships parked in space above the planet's surface. Rilke took in the sight of the displays and couldn't help but marvel at the sheer volume of information humanity was gathering. But what struck her more was the size and power of their military systems. She'd seen weaponry before, but this was something different. The humans weren't just preparing to defend their home, they were preparing to annihilate anything that dared threaten them. The officer's voice broke through her thoughts. "This is our primary deterrent system. We call it Plan A," he said, gesturing toward a large screen that displayed a massive ship suspended in orbit. It was huge, larger than any vessel Rilke had ever seen in her lifetime. "And this is Plan B," the officer continued as a new screen came to life, this one showing a smaller ship that was even more intimidating. The ship wasn't just built for firepower, it was designed to instill terror with its sheer presence. "You're going to need to sit down for this next part," he added with a hint of humor in his voice. Rilke felt a strange chill run down her spine, but she nodded and followed his instructions as the final screen lit up, showing a detailed blueprint of something beyond comprehension. The officer didn't seem to notice the growing tension in Rilke's posture. "This is our ultimate weapon," he said with a slight grin. "And trust me, you'll never see it coming." Rilke swallowed hard, her mind racing through possible strategies, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, but nothing could prepare her for the weight of humanity's words. She thought she understood power. She thought she knew what it meant to be in control, but humanity's approach was something altogether different, something far more terrifying. Rilke sat in stunned silence as the officer continued his explanation. She was trying to process what she'd just seen, the sheer scale of it all. But nothing seemed to fit with the Xalnar understanding of strategy. Her mind was racing, but the words that followed only seemed to deepen the confusion. "This is just the beginning," the officer said casually. "If we want peace, we need to make sure no one ever thinks they can push us around." His eyes gleamed with a kind of certainty that Rilke wasn't used to seeing from any species. It wasn't arrogance, but something more primal, something more dangerous. Rilke had seen war before. Countless civilizations wiped out by calculated precision, entire planets reduced to rubble in seconds. But this was something different. The humans didn't seem to fear destruction. They didn't just prepare for the worst, they actively embraced it. And Rilke was beginning to understand that this wasn't a mere defense strategy. It was a message. A warning. The humans weren't trying to stop war. They were trying to make sure no one would dare start one with them again. A voice broke her thoughts. "You should meet General Hale. the officer said, his tone shifting slightly. "She's in charge of all our military operations. She'll explain our methods in more detail." Rilke followed the officer down another long corridor, the walls lined with sleek metallic surfaces that seemed to hum with quiet energy. They arrived at a large open chamber filled with maps, digital displays, and communication terminals. At the center of the room stood a tall woman, dressed in a plain military uniform. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was a strange warmth in her expression, as though she wasn't just someone used to commanding armies. She was someone used to leading people. "General Hale," the officer said with a nod. "This is Rilke, the Salinar diplomat. She's here to observe our readiness for the Galactic Council." General Hale turned to Rilke, her gaze steady but not unfriendly. "I've heard about your species," she said, her voice surprisingly calm for someone who commanded entire fleets. "You're all about precision and efficiency. I have to admit, I'm curious about what you think of our methods." Rilke hesitated, unsure of what to say. She'd never met anyone like Hale. The general didn't speak with the calculated coolness of the Salinar. She spoke with an intensity that suggested she was always in control, but never afraid to show it. I've seen your weapons," Rilke finally said. "I understand you have the power to destroy entire fleets, planets even. But your approach, it's excessive." Hale smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Excessive? Maybe. But you have to understand something. Peace isn't just about diplomacy. It's about ensuring that no one ever thinks they can challenge you. It's about sending a message that, if pushed far enough, will end it before it ever becomes a problem." Rilke felt a knot tighten in her chest. The Salinar had always been a race that believed in precision. Every action, every decision was calculated. But the humans, they didn't calculate the consequences of their force. They embraced it. They were prepared to go as far as necessary to avoid ever being seen as weak. "You don't fear the consequences of your actions?" Rilke asked, her voice quiet but sharp. "How can you be sure this will work?" Hale's expression didn't waver. "Because, Rilke, we've seen what happens when people think they can push us. They get burned, and they don't try it again." The words hung in the air, heavier than Rilke had anticipated. She had come to Earth thinking she would find a species eager to join the Galactic Council, eager to follow the Salinar's example of precision and restraint. Instead, she was facing something far more dangerous, an unpredictable force that didn't just seek peace but demanded it through the threat of overwhelming retaliation. As she stood there, the weight of humanity's philosophy started to settle in. The Salinar had once believed they were the galaxy's most advanced species, but now she wasn't so sure. The humans had a kind of power that could bend the very concept of war to their will, and she had to figure out whether this power was a force for good or something much darker. General Hale's words echoed in Rilke's mind as they walked through another series of corridors. She tried to digest what she had just heard, but every time she thought she understood the humans, something new would shake her certainty. They weren't like any species she had ever encountered. They didn't just fight. They fought to make sure no one could ever fight again. As they entered a large hall, Rilke was struck by the display in front of her. It was a live feed of Earth's military operations, a coordinated dance of ships, drones, and ground forces moving in perfect synchronization. But there was something off about it. The humans weren't just planning. They were building, designing, and executing on a scale that felt almost excessive. "This is our primary deterrent," General Hale said, pointing toward a massive holographic map. "You saw Plan A. Now let me show you what happens when that's not enough." Rilke looked up and saw a detailed rendering of a massive orbital platform, larger than anything she had ever seen before. It looked like a city, but it was armed to the teeth. Missile pods, energy cannons, defensive shields, all designed for one thing: to destroy anything that threatened Earth. "We call this the Gauntlet," Hale continued. It's a last resort defense. If anyone dares enter our space with hostile intent, they'll meet it head-on. Rilke's heart skipped. This was madness. The Xalnar had weapons that could obliterate entire fleets, but they never built anything like this. They believed in subtlety, in balance, in ensuring no one even knew they had been defeated until it was too late. But this was an open invitation for battle, a promise that Earth would go down fighting no matter the cost. "You can't be serious," Rilke said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is a weapon of absolute destruction." Hale didn't flinch. "We don't use it unless we have to," she said calmly. "But if it comes to that, we make sure there's no question about who's in control. We're not looking for a fight, Rilke. But if it comes, we make sure it's over before it starts." Rilke couldn't help but feel a deep unease. The Xalnar had never needed such brute force. They had always relied on precision, on controlling the outcome without ever needing to escalate to such extreme measures. But here, in front of her, was a race that did just the opposite. Humans didn't care about precision. They cared about sending a message that anyone who dared cross them would face annihilation. "We don't just make weapons," Hale continued, as if sensing Rilke's thoughts. "We make sure the enemy knows exactly what will happen if they cross that line. It's not enough to win a battle. We need to make sure they understand the consequences before they even think about starting one." Rilke was silent, her mind swirling with questions. She had seen the Xalnar push their power to its limits, but the humans took it further than anyone had ever dared before. She had thought the Xalnar were the pinnacle of power and control, but now, standing in front of General Hale, she wasn't so sure anymore. "We do things differently here," Hale said, her tone matter-of-fact. "It's not about fighting battles. It's about making sure we never have to fight again." As Rilke tried to absorb the implications of Hale's words, she found herself confronted by the true nature of humanity's strength. It wasn't just in their weapons or their technology. It was in their mindset. They didn't seek peace through negotiation or compromise. They sought peace through dominance, through making sure that no one could ever challenge them again. But Rilke couldn't shake the feeling that, in this galaxy, there were forces far more powerful than humanity, forces that would see their methods as reckless, as dangerous. The Xalnar had learned the hard way that unchecked power was a fragile thing, and they had learned to use their strength carefully, precisely. But humanity, they seemed to throw caution to the wind, and Rilke didn't know if that made them the galaxy's most dangerous species, or its saviors. "I need to think," Rilke said, finally breaking the silence. "Take your time," Hale replied with a nod. "But just remember, Rilke, we're not looking for trouble, but we'll finish it if it comes to us." Rilke nodded, but the weight of what she had learned today would stay with her long after she left Earth. What kind of future awaited a galaxy where humanity's concept of overkill was the new standard? She wasn't sure. But she was beginning to think that peace through dominance might be the most dangerous idea the galaxy had ever seen. Rilke spent the next few days in a daze, trying to make sense of the human philosophy she had been introduced to. She had visited countless worlds, observed various species, but nothing had ever been quite like this. The humans weren't just about survival. They weren't even about victory. They were about certainty. They had built a system so overwhelming, so complete, that it seemed impossible to fail. But as Rilke sat in her temporary quarters, staring at the stars through the massive windows, she couldn't shake the nagging thought that something was missing. The Xalnar never relied on overwhelming force to solve their problems. They preferred subtlety, diplomacy, the precise application of power. To the Xalnar, anything beyond the necessary amount of force was a waste, a failure of strategy. But the humans, they didn't think like that. To them, more was always better. Bigger was always stronger. That afternoon, Rilke was summoned to meet with General Hale again. As she entered the room, she could feel the tension in the air. The humans were preparing for something. What exactly? She wasn't sure. But they had been on high alert since the Arish had arrived in their sector, and Rilke had a feeling the upcoming conflict would show her more of the human mindset than she had ever anticipated. "General Hale," Rilke began, her voice steady despite the unease in her chest. "I've been thinking a lot about your methods, and I have to ask, do you ever worry that you're going too far?" Hale looked at her, her face unreadable. "Too far?" she repeated, almost as if she hadn't considered the question before. "We've seen what happens when we don't go far enough, when we don't make it clear enough that we'll do whatever it takes. People don't respect weakness, Rilke. They never have." Rilke felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a military philosophy. This was something deeper, more ingrained. Humanity had decided, long ago, that they would never be weak, and they had built an entire culture around that decision. "You don't see the danger in this?" Rilke asked, her voice growing more intense. "You're building your society around fear. You're not just ensuring peace. You're ensuring domination, and you're willing to destroy everything to maintain it." Hale didn't flinch. "If it were as easy as signing a treaty or making nice with the neighbors, we wouldn't need all this firepower. But it's not, Rilke. There's always someone out there who's willing to push, and when they do, we make sure they know that crossing us means they'll never see another sunrise." Rilke clenched her fists. She was struggling to understand how something so brutal could be the foundation of peace, but as she watched Hale speak, something deep within her stirred. The humans weren't like the Xalnar. They didn't seek control through subtle manipulation or careful precision. They sought it through an undeniable show of force. They didn't care if the rest of the galaxy found their methods excessive. They didn't care if they were seen as reckless. They cared about one thing: ensuring that no one, ever, would challenge them again. "We've seen other species try to challenge us," Hale continued. "The Arish are just the latest in a long line of would-be conquerors, but they don't get it. They think they can scare us, intimidate us, but they don't understand what happens when you push humanity to its limits." Rilke stood in silence, the weight of Hale's words pressing down on her. The Arish had made a mistake. They had underestimated humanity, just as so many others had done before. But Rilke was starting to wonder if that mistake was only a symptom of something far more dangerous, a race that didn't know how to stop once they started. "And if they don't back down?" Rilke asked quietly, almost to herself. "If they don't?" Hale's eyes hardened, her voice lowering with deadly certainty. "Then we make sure they wish they had." The room grew quiet as Rilke processed the cold reality of what she was hearing. The humans weren't afraid of the consequences of their actions. They weren't afraid of escalation. They were prepared to carry it through to the end, no matter what it took. As she left the meeting, Rilke couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's obsession with overkill was both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. They had the power to crush any enemy, to eliminate any threat before it had a chance to grow. But at what cost? How far could they go before they started to destroy themselves in the process? She wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. She needed to understand this better before it was too late. The tension between the Xalnar and humanity had been building ever since Rilke's arrival on Earth. As days passed, her unease grew, especially after learning about the humans' readiness to go to extreme lengths to ensure peace. She had hoped it was all a misunderstanding, a series of isolated incidents, but the truth was undeniable. Humanity wasn't just preparing for war. They were preparing to end any war before it began, and with their endless arsenal of devastating weapons, they could do it with a terrifying finality. Rilke's thoughts were interrupted by an emergency communication from Earth's United Council. The Arish had made a move. The Arish, a race known for their ruthless tactics and their habit of conquering and enslaving weaker species, had been a constant threat to the galaxy. Their warships were equipped with powerful weapons and shields, and they were not shy about using them to assert their dominance. Rilke had expected them to make an appearance, but the timing was troubling. The Arish were too close to Earth's borders, too bold in their approach. They didn't seem afraid of the humans, and that, in itself, was dangerous. As Rilke arrived at the council chamber, she was greeted by General Hale and several high-ranking military officers. The air was thick with urgency. Holoscreens flickered to life, showing the Arish fleet approaching Earth at an alarming speed. Their ships were sleek and dark, designed for intimidation. The human defense network had already begun to mobilize, but it was clear that the Arish were testing them, pushing their limits. "This is it," General Hale said, her voice steady but heavy with determination. "They're trying to force our hand. We need to respond, and we need to respond now." Rilke studied the situation carefully. The Arish were known for their tactics of provocation. They didn't need to fight right away. Their goal was to make their enemy react, to draw them into a conflict and keep escalating until they had full control. The Arish were masters at finding the breaking point. Rilke knew the humans had their own ways of dealing with such threats, but there was something different about how they were handling this. "You're planning a counterstrike," Rilke said, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Aren't you?" General Hale turned to face her. "We don't just strike back, Rilke. We eliminate the problem. And if the Arish want to test us, they'll find out exactly what happens when they do." Rilke felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew exactly what that meant. The humans weren't preparing for a skirmish. They were preparing for an all-out war, one that would leave nothing but destruction in its wake. The more she learned about humanity's strategy, the more she realized that this wasn't just about defense. This was about dominance, about sending a clear message to anyone who dared challenge Earth. Hale's eyes were locked on the screens, her expression hard. "We're launching Plan B," she said, her voice calm but fierce. "It's time to remind the galaxy what happens when you think you can push us." The room fell silent. Rilke understood now. Plan B wasn't just a weapon. It was the human way of ensuring total control. It was overwhelming. It was final. And it was designed to leave no room for doubt. Rilke's mind raced. She knew that Salnar would never approve of such an extreme approach. They believed in balance, in restoring order through careful control. But the humans? They had no intention of waiting for balance. They had already made their decision. They would fight to end the threat, not just to survive, but to make sure no one ever dared challenge them again. As Rilke watched, she felt a sense of foreboding settle over her. She had seen the humans' power, their readiness to escalate to unimaginable levels. And now, she was witnessing the beginning of a war that could change the entire galaxy. The Arish had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity, just as the Salnar had once underestimated them. "Prepare for impact," Hale said, turning to her officers. "Let's show the galaxy what happens when you pick a fight with Earth." The room hummed with activity as the humans moved into action, their ships and weapons ready for the battle ahead. Rilke couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to unfold. She had come to Earth to observe and assess, but now she was a witness to something much larger. Humanity's philosophy of overwhelming force was about to be tested on a galactic scale. The Arish had picked the wrong fight, and now the universe would see just how far humanity was willing to go to protect their home. The battle unfolded faster than Rilke could process. The Arish fleet was no longer just a looming threat. It was right on the edge of Earth's atmosphere. Their ships, sleek and menacing, moved in tight formation, clearly intent on provoking the humans into action. But what Rilke couldn't understand was why they hadn't yet launched a full assault. The Arish were known for their aggression, their overwhelming need to conquer. But here they were, simply testing Earth's defenses, trying to force the humans to make the first move. And the humans were taking their time. Rilke could feel the tension in the air as General Hale stood at the center of the command room, eyes locked on the screens that displayed the enemy fleet. She was calm, her expression steely, but Rilke knew better than to assume there wasn't a storm brewing underneath. "They're not doing anything," Rilke said, her voice edged with confusion. "Why haven't they attacked yet?" Hale glanced at her, her tone quiet but firm. They're trying to bait us into doing something reckless. They want us to fire first, so they can justify their war. But we're not falling for it." Rilke wasn't sure if that was true. The humans had always responded with overwhelming force, but this time, it felt different. It was almost as if they were waiting for something. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their strategy than sheer power. Hale seemed to sense her doubt. "It's not just about showing them we can destroy them," Hale continued, her eyes still trained on the Irish fleet. "It's about proving that we can outthink them too. We have to control the situation. If they think we're unpredictable, they'll hesitate, and that hesitation will be their downfall." Just then, the alert lights flashed red, and a voice crackled through the comms. "The Irish have fired their first salvo. Multiple warheads inbound." Rilke's heart skipped a beat. She had expected the Irish to make a move, but it had come so suddenly, without the warning signs she had been trained to watch for. The first volley of missiles was heading directly for Earth's defense grid, targeting key orbital platforms. Hale's response was immediate. "Activate the gauntlet. Now." The command was clear, and Rilke could feel the hum of the massive orbital platform as it powered up. The gauntlet was a last resort measure, one that Rilke had seen briefly when she first arrived, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. Its sheer size, the raw firepower it contained, was a spectacle of terrifying proportions. The missiles streaked toward Earth, but they were met with a wall of energy from the gauntlet. Brilliant beams of concentrated energy sliced through the incoming warheads, obliterating them in a series of explosions that lit up the sky. The Irish fleet hesitated, their ships pulling back slightly as if unsure how to proceed. "That's the first warning," Hale said, her eyes still glued to the screens. "They'll test us again, but we don't back down. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast." Rilke was stunned. The Irish had fired their weapons, and the humans had responded with overwhelming force, using a system designed to completely neutralize any threat with ease. But that wasn't the end of it. The gauntlet was a statement, a clear declaration that Earth would not tolerate any further provocation. "They're retreating," Rilke said, watching as the Irish ships began to pull back into deeper space, away from Earth's orbit. "Not yet," Hale said, her voice still calm, though her eyes flickered with intensity. "They're just regrouping. They'll come at us again, but now they know what we're capable of. And next time, they'll think twice." Rilke watched the screens, her mind racing. The humans had responded with such certainty, with such precision. They had made their point clear. They were not afraid, not intimidated. But Rilke could see something else in their actions. The humans weren't just relying on their weapons. They were playing a larger game, one that involved psychological warfare as much as military might. "They'll try again," Rilke said softly, more to herself than anyone. "But this time, it's different. The Irish will know they've underestimated you." Hale nodded. "That's the goal. We don't just fight them. We make them second-guess every move. We're not playing their game. We're rewriting the rules." The command room was quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed the weight of what had just happened. The Irish had fired the first shots, but the humans had made sure they would never forget who controlled the battlefield. Rilke knew this wasn't just about defeating the Irish. It was about establishing dominance, about making sure that no one, not even the Irish, would ever dare challenge Earth again. And in that moment, Rilke began to understand. This was humanity's true power, the ability to turn any conflict, no matter how dire, into a lesson for the galaxy. A lesson about their strength, about their resolve, about the overwhelming certainty that no one could ever take what was theirs. The days following the initial skirmish were filled with a tense silence. The Irish had retreated, but no one in Earth's command centers dared assume they had given up. Rilke spent her time observing, still trying to understand the depths of humanity's strategy. General Hale was as steady as ever, her focus unshaken, even as the Irish fleet lingered at the edge of Earth's territory, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Rilke had learned more in the past few days than she ever expected. She had thought she understood the humans' overwhelming force. She had seen the gauntlet in action, watched as entire swarms of missiles were obliterated with ease. But what she hadn't fully grasped was the psychological aspect of their approach. The humans weren't just trying to win. They were trying to make an impression. They wanted their enemies to understand that to challenge Earth was to risk total annihilation. That night, as Rilke sat in the observation room, watching the stars drift by, she was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was General Hale. "I thought you might want to see this," Hale said, her tone calm, but carrying an edge of something more. She gestured for Rilke to follow. Rilke stood, intrigued, and followed Hale down a narrow hallway to another command center. This room was smaller, quieter, its walls lined with digital displays, showing the current positions of both the Arish and Earth's forces. A large screen on the far wall displayed a live feed of an Arish ship, a heavily armored war vessel, suddenly shifting its position in space. "They've made their move," Hale said, her eyes narrowing as she studied the image. "They're coming back." Rilke couldn't deny the tension in her chest as she watched the Arish fleet moving toward Earth's defenses once again. The sight of their ships, so sleek and aggressive, made her wonder if this would be the confrontation that would define Earth's fate. Would the Arish push them to the limit, or would they back down again? "We're ready for them," Hale said confidently, as if reading Rilke's thoughts. "But we're not going to make the first move this time." Rilke raised an eyebrow. "You're waiting." "Waiting for the right moment," Hale replied. "We've already shown them we can destroy them if we need to. Now we need to show them we can outthink them too." Rilke was silent for a moment, trying to comprehend the depth of what Hale was saying. The humans weren't reacting out of desperation. They were playing a much larger game, keeping the Arish on edge, pushing them to act rashly. Rilke had to admit it was brilliant, but it was also risky. The Arish wouldn't be easily deterred. They were relentless, always looking for weaknesses. As Rilke continued to watch, her mind raced. The Arish were methodical, but the humans were unpredictable. And this, Rilke realized, was humanity's greatest strength. They didn't follow any set patterns. They didn't respond with typical military strategy. They were willing to think outside of everything the galaxy knew about warfare. They had shown their power. Now, they were showing their intelligence. Just then, the room's comms crackled. "The Arish are making their approach. They're charging their main weapons." Hale's expression remained unchanged. "Let them. We'll let them get close enough to make a mistake. Then we'll take control." Rilke couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for the general. It wasn't just about overwhelming firepower anymore. The humans were letting the Arish play their hand, knowing that once the Arish made their move, there would be no going back. The humans were playing them, just as they had been playing the rest of the galaxy. But Rilke's admiration was tempered by a growing unease. The humans were a force to be reckoned with. That much was clear. But the more Rilke witnessed their tactics, the more she realized that their concept of victory wasn't just about survival. It was about domination, ensuring that no one could ever question Earth's strength again. The Arish fleet was getting closer. Rilke's stomach tightened as she watched the countdown to what could be the final battle unfold on the screen. This was it. There was no turning back now. Hale stood silently, her eyes locked on the approaching ships. She was waiting for the right moment to strike. Rilke couldn't help but wonder what would happen if the Arish didn't back down. What would happen if they called humanity's bluff? But as the Arish moved into range, the human fleet was ready. And so was Rilke. The next few moments would decide everything. Would the humans' careful balance of strength and strategy be enough to end the threat? Or would this escalation be the beginning of a conflict that would shake the galaxy to its core? Rilke could only watch as the storm gathered, knowing that humanity's answer was already written in the stars. The tension in the command room was unbearable. Rilke could feel it, the weight of every eye fixed on the approaching Arish fleet. The Arish ships, formidable and dark, were closing in, their weapons charging. Every calculated second felt like an eternity. General Hale stood at the front of the room, her eyes never leaving the screens, her hands folded behind her back. "We've given them every chance to retreat," Hale said quietly, her voice calm but filled with an unmistakable finality. "Now we respond, but only when they make their move." Rilke watched as the Arish ships fired a volley of energy blasts, their weapons charged and ready to destroy. The hum of the shields on Earth's defense grid intensified as it absorbed the blows. A few moments passed in silence, the tension thick, before Hale gave the order. "Activate the countermeasures. All units, prepare to engage." The room came alive with the rush of orders. Officers and technicians moved with practiced speed, their fingers flying across consoles as Earth's fleet mobilized. Rilke felt the hum of the energy beams charging up, ready to be unleashed. But this time, she knew it wasn't just the Gauntlet's firepower they were relying on. The humans had something else planned. Something more subtle, more terrifying. The Arish fleet, seeing their initial attack absorbed by Earth's defenses, was not backing off. Instead, they pressed forward, more confident than ever. They must have believed that their firepower could overpower Earth's shields eventually. They didn't expect what would happen next. "Release the drones," Hale ordered. Suddenly, a swarm of smaller vessels shot out from Earth's defenses, like a flood of metallic bees swarming their target. These drones weren't just weapons, they were designed for disruption. As they neared the Arish fleet, their systems activated a series of rapid-frequency jamming signals, scrambling the Arish ships' targeting systems. The drones darted around the Arish ships, avoiding incoming blasts with incredible agility, disorienting their attackers at every turn. Rilke watched in awe as the drones caused chaos within the Arish ranks. Their ships were no longer firing with precision. Their once unified formations broke apart as the Arish commanders struggled to regain control. It was clear that the humans had anticipated this exact response. The Arish had underestimated Earth's ingenuity, just as they had underestimated its power. But this wasn't the end. As the Arish scrambled to regroup, General Hale gave the final command. "Deploy the full force. Bring them down." The massive, imposing ships of Earth's fleet emerged from the shadows of the larger space stations. The moment they fired, the sheer force of the energy cannons lit up the sky, streaking toward the Arish ships with a blinding brilliance. Each shot hit with perfect accuracy, tearing through shields and hulls with unyielding precision. The Arish had no time to react, no room to maneuver. The overwhelming firepower was unlike anything they had ever faced. In minutes, the battle was decided. The Arish fleet, once an imposing force, was in retreat, their ships in disarray, some already torn apart by the relentless bombardment. Earth had shown them the full extent of its might, not just through strength, but through strategy, through intelligence. They had outmaneuvered the Arish at every turn. The command room erupted into a series of quick, sharp exhalations. The tension lifted, but the weight of what had just transpired hung heavily in the air. Rilke stood, still processing, as General Hale finally turned to her. There was no celebration, no joy in her eyes, just a hard resolve. "We didn't just win, Rilke," Hale said, her voice low but purposeful. "We made sure the Arish understand something. Something every species that comes after them will need to know. Earth doesn't just defend itself. Earth finishes what it starts." Rilke nodded, slowly beginning to grasp the full depth of humanity's philosophy. It wasn't just about protecting their own. It wasn't even about defeating their enemies. It was about sending a message that no one would ever again dare to challenge Earth. And in doing so, they were changing the rules of galactic warfare. As she watched the Arish ships retreat into the distance, Rilke couldn't help but wonder what the rest of the galaxy would think. Would they see Earth's overwhelming force as a threat, or would they learn to respect the humans' unshakable resolve? In the quiet aftermath of the battle, one thing was certain. Earth had left an indelible mark on the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. Rilke turned to leave the command room, the stars outside seeming to shimmer with a new light. The universe had just witnessed humanity's true power, and she knew it would be a long time before anyone dared to test it again.